Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How Nutanix Makes Disaster Recovery Simple and Affordable with Cloud-Based Disaster Recovery as a Service. This event is brought to you in partnership with Nutanix, and we'll have a special guest from the Enterprise Strategy Group. Thank you so much for joining us on today's special webinar. We have got a lot in store for you today. Now, before we get started, we've got a little bit of housekeeping that we first need to cover. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. Now, we want this event to be an educational event, so we encourage you to use the questions box. It's on the left-hand side of your audience console. You'll see right next to the word handouts, there's the word questions, and if you click on that, that's where you can enter your questions about today's topic. We encourage you to bring those questions there to us in the questions box, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Experts from Nutanix are standing by to answer your questions throughout the presentation. We also have a handout there in the Handouts tab. I encourage you to download that. And we will be announcing the winner of the Tango $300 gift card on today's live presentation. Tango gift cards can be redeemed for e-gift cards at your choice of hundreds of retailers, including Walmart, Best Buy, and many restaurants. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the Handouts tab. And now I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Ed Collins, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Nutanix, and Mr. Christophe Bertrand, Senior Analyst at the Enterprise Strategy Group. It's great to have both of you on the event today. And with that, I'll hand it over first to Christophe. Take it away, Christophe.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, everyone, for joining. I'd like to spend some time today to cover some important findings from recent research we just conducted at ESG. We are an IT analyst and research and validation firm, and we do a lot of work with end users as well as IT professionals, and that's where we get a lot of our data from. So enough said about us, and let me just jump directly into what we're seeing in this new normal. We recently went out and talked to IT executives as well as remote users, and we asked them many questions, and I'm just sharing some of this research here. And it's very important that you understand that obviously not only have things changed, but it's having an impact on what technologies are being deployed, how they're being deployed, consumed, and therefore it makes certain technologies a lot more relevant today. We kind of knew that, but now we have the data behind it. So first of all, we specifically asked our respondents, and here this is the view from an IT executive perspective, what the current situation is doing in terms of the impact overall on relying on IT. And obviously, clearly the value of technology is obvious. It's made all of us and IT professionals as well recognize that more reliant on information technology. And if you're more reliant on IT, you are more reliant on data, and therefore that data has to be protected. We also then looked closely at the behaviors that have been impacted or are being impacted by this, what we call this new normal. And some impacts are of course immediate, but others are going to be long lasting and are going to stay and maybe change things forever in terms of what the IT infrastructure does to support its end users and support the business processes. Here we took a broader perspective and asked specifically about those lasting impacts. And what was very interesting here, I want to draw you here to some of the results that, of course, the obvious one is online collaboration. That was expected. But look at the other results. Increased adoption of cloud applications. So SaaS is a good example. And we all know we've been using more SaaS applications, but this is a long-lasting impact, meaning that after this health situation goes away, we will probably still be using a lot of these tools, and those tools permeate the environment. Means that, for example, leveraging a disaster recovery as a service type of solution, if it's something that you've set up in this new normal, you're likely going to continue to use it. So things are not just going to go away because the health scare, if you will, has gone away. I note here again as the third response here that people provided, and we see that the accelerated use of public cloud infrastructure is in very good position. So, and there's a lot of cloud-related type of capabilities, and some of them will also appear and permeates through new architectures and applications, containers, etc. Cloud is everywhere. So this is something that is very important to remember. Cloud is going to be absolutely something that gets accelerated, is accelerated now, and is likely going to last well past the current situation. And finally, of course, there are some transitions happening at the endpoint that I should mention, and those have a consequence also on the overall infrastructure, obviously, but also in some of the measures that need to be taken into account from a protection perspective, ransomware, cybersecurity. Remember that one of the remediation paths to a cyber attack is to have a great backup and recovery and disaster recovery solution in place so you can get back on your feet should anything come up. We also looked at the money, because there is, or maybe was a perception that with the economic situation, maybe the IT spending is really going to be vastly affected. And of course, there are some sectors that are clearly affected, and there are some changes. There is no question about that. But there are areas where it turns out there will be more money going into investments on the IT infrastructure. It is actually a great time to be investing, of course, in remote and telework solutions. We're expecting this result, but I want to point you here to the top 5. And what do we see? Data protection, public cloud infrastructure and applications and services, and cybersecurity. This is the perfect combination in a sense, because what this does, it really demonstrates that although things are changing, although there are some contractions in some budgetary items due to the current situation, there are actually significant investments going in the provision of data protection and the provision of services. And again, cyber is not far away from it and is always a tie, if you will, in terms of the data protection investments. Cybersecurity, data protection, cloud go hand in hand. So this is what we're seeing. This is data that is really, really fresh. We just got it back from the field. So there will be some investments, and if you're watching us right now, you are making the right decision to stay informed and consider some disaster recovery capabilities, additional capabilities leveraging cloud. I wanted to also specifically call out the lineup of technologies and just reinforce the fact that data protection is in very, very good shape, actually, when you look at where the budgets will be spent. As a matter of fact, 1 in 4 are going to be spending more than their original 2020 budget. I think that's very significant. And again, look at where the spending is going in terms of increases. Of course, remote telework solutions, but cybersecurity, as I said, those are intertwined with data protection. And more importantly, over half of the respondents we talked to, and again, all IT professionals, decision makers, many of them, hundreds of them, their spending won't change. So while, of course, there will be some contraction for some of them, some of these respondents, the vast majority for data protection is actually not going to change their spending. They're actually going to spend more. So very important data points here that I think, again, maybe something you can use as you engage with your management to validate that it is the right thing to be looking at further investments in disaster recovery. So why do we care? Why care about disaster recovery? Why care about making these investments? It's because you can't really afford to lose data. We, of course, don't like to lose data. We all know that individually, but from a business standpoint, you're looking at very significant business consequences. Here, what we did is we looked at in a different research effort, we looked at the impacts of downtime and or lost data on the business, and we asked IT professionals to tell us what they thought. I think it's very obvious that data loss is not a technology or technical issue as much as it is a business issue. You are immediately impacting the business, and it translates into pretty dire consequences. Customer confidence loss, of course, direct revenue loss. If you're not transacting, if your systems are down, you're not making money, you're not booking deals. And some missed business opportunities. There's also, of course, all the negative components that happen and aspects that happen with the loss of employee confidence and the brand damage. You don't want to be a company that is known for having lost data or having become unavailable, because that gets very visible very quickly, especially in the social media driven world we live in. And from an IT standpoint, you also get diverted in terms of your attention. You get monopolized to solve the issue, and maybe you should be spending time on other projects, improving the infrastructure. So there are some pretty significant direct and indirect consequences to either downtime or data loss. So you have to do anything you can to get an infrastructure solution in place that allows you to get back on your feet quickly in a way that minimizes data loss. Those are, I think, again, the consequences speak for themselves. The benefit of having this is you can really put numbers behind it. I would say a lot of us, especially in the IT space, we would probably guess these, but here we have data again, one more time, to demonstrate the actual impacts. By the way, as you're looking at this, understand that the yellow is the most concerning impact. So pick the one, if you will, and the blue shows all of the impacts that could happen. And obviously, you don't have just one impact, you have multiples. That's why we asked the question this way, but also ask people to give us their pecking order. Again, we were talking to IT professionals and they talked about direct loss of revenue, and that is very, very problematic for the business. So let's sort of look at now the solution part of the equation, and really how you can approach this. And again, in the research we did, we took a look at the type of resiliency solutions that could be put in place to alleviate those issues. And here in this case, we zoomed in on the VM resiliency from infrastructure, from an infrastructure as a service perspective. And I think what we saw is very obvious here, that people believe, the general sentiment, again, it is based on the experience of IT professionals. People are saying essentially here that, hey, look, cloud-hosted VMs are either much more resilient or somewhat more available or resilient. So there's a lot of faith in those in VMs that are hosted in the cloud, and I think it's a very good thing, because a lot of the infrastructure today on premises relies on VMs. It is important to have solutions that are in the cloud leveraging that same type of infrastructure. And again, it looks like there is a very high degree of confidence that it is the right call. People are experiencing more resiliency leveraging VMs in the cloud. As you think about now, okay, it's great to be using cloud-based data protection, but what have people said, and why, and what has been their experience is that actually you've answered some of the key issues that we've brought up before when you have downtime, which is, one of them is cost and operational efficiency problems. Here, when you use data protection services that are cloud-based, what we see is that reduce costs and improve recoverability are the top two answers that we get. And that really tells me that we have reached a level of maturity now where there's a lot of confidence, as there should be, in leveraging a cloud-based data protection solution. You also get better security, which is a good thing to hear, because there's always been concern about, hey, where's my data, who's managing it, is it more exposed? Actually, you get more security, or certainly there is a sentiment that you get more security here because you're dealing with a provider whose job it is to really take care of your data. So investments in cybersecurity are very important to them as well. And then there are some additional benefits, I'm not going to go through all of them, that really allow you to be operationally more efficient, either because you reduce your complexity in the environment or because you just have more time to do more things and use the IT resources, the people you have to focus on other projects and new projects to support the business. So I know it's a lot of data to absorb in a short period of time. I'd like to thank you for listening to me for this past few minutes. And more importantly, I'd like to turn it over to Ed.
Thanks a bunch, Christoph. Always great to hear from ESG and yourself specifically. Really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. As you know, I'm Ed Collins, and I'm responsible for Nutanix Disaster Recovery Portfolio Marketing. And speaking of customers, Christoph, let's look at one of ours. Let's look at the FIA Group. They're a legal services group in the healthcare industry. They run proprietary software suite. They had needs that looked like this. They needed a performance boost, and they also needed a unified solution for their disaster recovery solution. And that solution needed to cover, or needed to improve, client backlog. They were suffering from some backlog issues with their clientele. They wanted their customer satisfaction ratings to improve, which of course you add those two things together with a few other elements and their overall profitability would increase. So they had these real needs that some of you on the line actually might be able to relate to. As their Vice President of Technology stated, Xileap ultimately eliminated all of the complexity of deploying and managing multiple point solutions for their disaster recovery solution. So the solution looked like this, that they ran the Nutanix AHV hypervisor on-prem in their on-prem data center. And then they essentially replicated their virtual machines to the Xi Cloud for disaster recovery protection. And they accomplished all of this with Nutanix. And the results were great. They eliminated that client backlog I alluded to earlier. They reduced their IT overhead and the overall time spent managing their disaster recovery solution. They also saw a 24-fold improvement on recovery point objective. That's phenomenal. They also saw a 2-fold improvement on recovery time objective, which, if you've been in the business, is a tremendous success story for both the FIA Group and Nutanix. I just wanted to show you the global footprint for Xileap. As you can see in this graphic, we have a sizable footprint with plans to expand as the Xileap business grows. We have data centers built out in the west and east coast of the United States. We have one in London. We have one in Italy, Germany, and also Japan. We've also partnered with strategic direct connect partners for VPN connectivity. Megaports there, Telecom Italia, as well as Equinix. So let's step back for a moment. What if you had the ability to provide your business with fully automated failover and failback with single-click management? What value would that provide? What if you had the ability to certify your DR plan, the viability of it, and verify your service level agreements in minutes? Or what if you had the ability to provide improved uptime to the business owner at a low cost, ensuring business continuity? How do these things help you? Well, with Nutanix Xileap, you're able to protect your mission critical apps and data with highly configurable protection policies. You can refine and even regularly test your RPO and RTO metrics to ensure compliance with your service level agreements. And then finally, you save money while achieving your DR requirements, even turning some of your CapEx into OpEx. So what does this solution look like? In order to understand how Nutanix protects your applications and data, we have to begin talking about hyperconverged infrastructure. It all begins with a software stack that is fault tolerant and resilient to the core. This Nutanix HCI platform is fault resistant with no single points of failure and no bottlenecks. Virtual machines run inside of your primary data center where data, metadata, and services are shared across all nodes in a cluster. And that's what you see on the left. The platform is self-healing, which allows a cluster to automatically detect, isolate, and recover from failures. And it also provides resiliency to system hardware, software, and hypervisor services. And all of this happens without operator intervention. Now, disaster recovery is simply a native extension to this software architecture. And it's something that Nutanix has been doing for years now in the private cloud. The good news is that it's the same software stack that runs in the primary data center that runs in the Xi cloud. We like to say same software equals same goodness. And as a result, the Xi disaster recovery service is a native extension to your on-prem data center. So Xi disaster recovery as a service is perfect for companies that don't want to build out a secondary data center for DR. It is a subscription-based service with a variety of payment options, whether you want to, pay month to month, pay as you go, or opt for a 1 to 5 year service contract. This is especially helpful when you consider turning CapEx into OpEx as a result of the subscription service, and because it frees up cash for other business priorities. So in a nutshell, the Nutanix software takes incremental snapshots of your VMs running in the primary data center, and it replicates them to the Xi cloud. Xi uses what we call protection policies to configure RPO metrics and recovery plans, which is really runbook automation, to automate failover and failback scenarios, whether planned or unplanned. And one more piece of good news is that the entire hybrid cloud solution, including the Xi portion, is managed through a single pane of glass called Prism Central. And failover is completed in a single click. And by the way, because Xi is owned and operated by Nutanix, we offer financially backed, guaranteed service level agreements. So just to summarize, Xi disaster recovery as a service, there's no need, obviously, to build out a secondary disaster recovery data center. It's a subscription-based service that's managed through a single pane of glass. We call it Prism. And there's one-click failover and failback and anytime testing. So really is these three things: simple, affordable, true cloud service. First, Xi is simple. If you've been in the business for any period of time, you know that setting up disaster recovery is not a simple task. Not historically, anyways. Traditionally, you have to provision a second site, whether it's your own or on top of a public infrastructure provider. You also need to deploy and set up replication technologies. You have to build a DR plan and ideally deploy runbook automation for orchestration's sake. You have to configure both security and networking connectivity for failover situations. With Xi Leap Disaster Recovery, we have the opportunity to converge all of those things into a single offering. And since Nutanix Xi Leap collapses all of these concerns and their associated costs into a single solution for you, the number of steps alone to configure Xi Leap is about 10 times fewer than alternative solutions. In fact, it's not uncommon for us to onboard a new Xi Leap customer in less than an hour. Second, Xi Leap is affordable. What you see here is a picture of the traditional data center build out, right? Data center, to build out a new data center, you've got concerns about infrastructure, power and rent, operational expenses, including people that have to be trained up, etc., networking costs, and of course the licensing for hypervisor and DR automation software. With Xileap, you enjoy a single subscription service that collapses all of this into a single price point. And the way that, due to economies of scale, what our customers are seeing is 40 to 50% savings in total cost of ownership. And so, as you can imagine, for many customers, this is a no-brainer. Third, Xileap is a true cloud service. So first, we're a true cloud service. There's no need for you to worry about infrastructure, hardware, software, upgrades, management, etc. You don't need to worry about that. We do 900 virtual machine failovers a day. We use canary accounts just to ensure that the service is up and running properly. We also proactively alert our customers to anything we see that might not look right. So far, we've had an 84% catch rate, which is really phenomenal. And that's where that quote there on the screen comes into play. That's a customer of ours, a happy customer, that said thank you for the message when they received this proactive outreach. They said thank you for the message. It's really gratifying to know that you are watching our disaster recovery environment as closely as you are. It's good to know that the entire solution is secured by Nutanix engineers, and also that we offer guaranteed financially backed SLAs for RPO and RTO. And one of the key indicators that we're doing it right is this Net Promoter Score of 92, which is stratospheric if you know anything about that. The point is that Nutanix customers love Nutanix, and the Xileap solution really is no different. So there are just three key differentiators that I want to leave you with that really set Xileap apart from competition. First, we have the planning and onboarding aspect of it. Because it's the same software stack, you have the same level of confidence you would in your on-prem deployment of Nutanix software. We support multiple hypervisors, whether it's ESXi or AHV. And we also have, as I mentioned earlier, very flexible VPN support. There's an included VPN from Nutanix. If you want to bring your own, as you see there in the slide, whether it's Cisco, Checkpoint, Fortinet, etc., you can do that. Or you can opt for one of those direct connect providers that I mentioned earlier. There's also the advantage of continuous testing in a non-production environment scenario where you're not actually disrupting your production environment. We give you a separate, I like to call it a sandbox, a separate subnet where you can test your failover. And you can do it as frequently as you'd like. You're also able to validate your SLAs for compliance sake because Nutanix provides detailed reports. And then finally, in terms of the simplicity of the solution, it's very simple. It's one click, actually, done through a single pane of glass that is managing the entire hybrid cloud infrastructure. And also you get to keep your existing IP network topology during failover and address schema. So these are just three key differentiators that our customers have voiced to us regarding Xileap. One last bit of housekeeping here, so to speak. Xileap is also secure. Since Xileap is a native extension to our on-prem data center or to your on-prem data center, the security posture is consistent, whether it is on-prem or in the cloud or traversing the internet. Xileap meets ISO 27001, 27017, and 27018 certification criteria. We employ end-to-end data encryption with strong encryption for data at rest, but also we provide encryption for data in flight. Again, just want to reiterate it. Simple, affordable, true cloud service. You know, now's a great time to actually show you what you just saw. I'm going to hand the reins over now to Dwayne Lessner, Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at Nutanix, to give you a demo.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dwayne Lessner from the Technical Marketing team at Nutanix. What we're going to show in this demo is failing over to Xi Leap, which is our DR as a service. We are looking at Prism Central. Prism Central is managing multiple clusters. We have 3 clusters here: Xi TME, we have Healthcare Apps, which is ESXi, and Cloud MCM5, which is HV, and so is the Xi TME one. And so what we're going to do is look at the VMs that we're protecting. So now that the DR is enabled in Prism Central with our Leap functionality, we're going to take a look at the virtual machines. We see that we have hundreds of virtual machines, but we already have some applied to a category. We have 2 categories that we're using for our protection policy. And so these 4 VMs are what we're going to be protecting and then replicating to Xi Leap. So by just simply applying the category, they're automatically going to be replicated by the associated policy. We do not have to worry about or manage any of the hardware on the Xi Leap side, so it becomes pretty easy. If we take a look at this SQL VM and take a look at the NICs, we will see that the IP address is 140 and the MAC address is 480DD. We just want to make a mental note so as we fail over that these are the same on the cloud service. This is important because you want the same MAC address if you have licensing tied to that. Some applications do that. So you just want everything to be the same and consistent. So here are the 4 virtual machines. These are the 2 categories. And now that we've taken a look at that, let's look at the protection policies. So these protection policies are controlled in Prism Central and then get filtered down to the individual clusters where the virtual machines are applied. So if we look at this break glass in case of emergency, we see that we're covering our local AZ, so this Prism Central, protecting all of our clusters with 1 policy, and our recovery location is Xi Leap, the USA East region. We are going to use an asynchronous protection policy, an RPO of 1 hour. So every hour we're going to replicate our virtual machines that are protected. We're using a roll-up schedule. The roll-up schedule is quite nice because it'll do 24 hourly, 7 dailies, and 3 weeklies with the above retention. And so it just is a nice stepped schedule. And if we look at the bottom on the local retention, we see that it's different. We're using less of our on-prem storage and more of our cloud storage where it's more abundant. And so if we're running an all-flash cluster on-prem, we are conserving the high-performance storage for our application. And if we take a look at we can do app consistent snapshots by just installing NGT and checking this box off. Based on the retention and how big the VMs are, we can apply per VM pricing. And then here we have our categories again, which have already been applied. So, if you're creating this for the first time, you'd hit save. And then the policy goes from Prism Central, gets applied to the virtual machines, and then the integrated DR takes care of replicating the workload. So our policy is now in effect. If we take a look at the recovery plans, which are also part of Prism Central, the recovery plans perform the boot ordering, power on sequence. It allows us to stage our failure or recovery. So if we look at the save the day and do update, we see that we have the name. We have 2 different categories. The database stage is going first, followed by the web tier. We have a slight delay, so our database can have time. It could be larger. We're just going small, so we don't have to sit and wait for it. And then the dev tier will go. If we look at we can also enable scripts. So if you want to have different embedded scripts ran after failover, you can do that both for production and test workflows. So I'll hit next. And then on the network settings sides, we're keeping the network mappings the same. By doing this, we will automatically create the network in our disaster recovery service. So making very simple to fail over. If we had a virtual machine that needed a floating IP, we could also do that. So if you had like a DMZ, you wanted a jump host, that would also be available. So that is done. So now that we have protection policies and recovery plans, let's go into our XyLeap service. You can tell that it's XyLeap because we have a leap in the middle here. It looks very similar to Prism Central. And so we see that we have virtual machines already running over here. Just clear this off. So we do have about 56 VMs running. We have images already loaded that could be used to spin up your own environment or additional VMs, Active Directory as an example, maybe some Windows images. And we look, if we go to the recovery plans, so these are automatically synced to XyLeap. And if we go, we see validate. So you want to run validate anytime you want to, you make any changes, make sure everything's going to be okay. There's no cost for running that. We have tests. You can automatically spin up your workload in an isolated bubble during production hours without wreaking havoc on the rest of your environment. If you are spinning up hundreds of VMs, you can just run this cleanup test VMs. So that can be quite handy as well. So we'll do failover here. So we always fail over at our destination side. We have our on-prem Prism Central registered going to XyLeap, and we have our 4 virtual machines. We'll hit failover. I like the plan failover just because it does shut down the virtual machines first and then replicate any last changes. We could have done unplanned, in case of if you had an outage. That's one that you would use. You'd use the last snapshot that's available on the cloud side. So by right, that is actually faster, but we're just making sure that we keep all of our changes and move them across. The failover has been initiated. We can take a look at the failover. If we take a look at the failover, we see that it did create our network on the fly on stage 2. It migrated our SQL workload over, and then in stage 3, it finally activated our WordPress virtual machine. And so then, if we go and take a look at the VM itself, we will go take a look at our SQL VM. And so here is our SQL VM. If we take a look at the NICs, we see that 140, it's been preserved, and we have our 4ADD MAC address. So that is how simple it is to fail over into XyLeap. Can easily protect all of your workloads without having to worry about managing another data center. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a bunch for the demo, Dwayne. As you can see, XyLeap is a simple solution to configure. The next step is to see it in action for yourself. So I encourage you, take a XyLeap test drive today by using the link you see here. I just want to say thanks again for your time and reiterate that, XyLeap is a simple, affordable, true cloud disaster recovery as a service solution. That concludes the presentation portion of this webinar. Please do stick around for a live Q&A.
All right, excellent presentation. Thank you so much to Ed and Dwayne. Really cool stuff. Love seeing the live demo. I've just brought up a poll question on the screen. The question is, what additional information would you like about the Nutanix solution? I'll leave that up there while we do some Q&A from the audience, and then we'll be announcing our gift card winner. So let's see, if you have a question about Nutanix, now is the time. We've got a lot of great questions that have come in during the presentation, but give us your toughest challenge, and we're here to solve it, especially when it comes to disaster recovery. So first, I want to make sure, Ed and Dwayne, are you there?
Yeah, you bet.
Awesome. All right. So first question that came in, they're asking is, what's the support model for XyLeap, and what's the pricing model as well? Dwayne, you want to take that?
Yeah, maybe we'll probably co-answer it, but as far as support goes, it's still kind of the single throat to choke. You're going to call Nutanix support And we do have dedicated specialists, but you're all going to end up in the same queue. So you'll be well taken care of. And then as pricing goes, there's two different models, but most customers tend to go the per VM pricing, which is based on the retention and the RPO that you select. But if you're planning on protecting a very large environment, there's like a 2% cost of the list price of your cluster, which also can be used. So there's some different models that may be more cost effective.
Very nice. All right, I like that, the different pricing models there. That's always good to have options when it comes to pricing. Next question, they're asking, what's the recovery time objective that Zyleap can provide?
Currently, right now, the lowest is 1 hour, but shortly we'll also be supporting near sync, which will get it down to 1 minute if you have if your network, I guess, to a Zyleap data center can do that.
Okay, nice. And here's a question that came in from Dave. He's asking if this does automated disaster failover. So if there is a disaster, kind of what happens next? Do you normally test for, to make sure the site's really down and then you initiate the failover, or would it be possible to automatically failover? How does that work?
The service today doesn't have a witness, but you can go into the Zyleap portal and then initiate the failover from that side. So like if we do have a product on-prem called Metro that does automated failovers with a witness, but that solution has an RPO of 0, so there's like no data loss. So we don't have that for the service today.
Okay. And then another question here. Sorry, go ahead.
No, there's some we also have automation available within Prism Central called Crossplay, where you can respond to events and alerts. So there's some other scripting you could do there as well. So there are some options, but.
Okay, nice. And it might not always be good to have an immediate automated failover because it could be a false failover as well. So always good to do a lot of checking before.
Can be nasty. I guess more
right.
Split brain scenarios.
Absolutely, yeah. Here's a question from Hussein, who's asking, how long has Nutanix and Zyleap how long have they been around for?
The company itself, so I've been here for 7 years, and I believe we're just over 10 years as a company. And the product itself, we've had the base DR in the product since, probably after the second year of selling, we had a native DR. And this is just kind of building on top of it into Prism Central, which I think we've had Leap orchestration for about 2 years. The Zyleap service is just over a year and a couple months.
Nice. Follow-up question here from Hussein, who's asking, is the service able to handle disasters when most of the company in the area is affected by weather-related events? Is that kind of a primary use case?
Yeah, you bet. So as long as you're, if you're, say, in Colorado, if we're taking a North American example, and you had an issue there, you could fail over into the east or the west data center and be fine. Or, depending on where you are in the world, just one of those other areas. So the data centers themselves are highly available as much as one physical location can be, but yeah, should be fine.
Okay. Let's see, next question. Does Zyleap offer application awareness or consistency?
We do have application awareness tied to the policy. So you'll probably end up with 2 protection policies, one with and one without, depending on what you're trying to protect. So we can do that as well. And that's just using Nutanix guest tools. You will deploy that through Prism Central, and it just inserts the drivers for you to do that.
Okay, nice. And then another question, what's the maximum number of VMs that can be protected with Xileap?
Lower and greater than 1 million. No, the answer is, so the recovery plans today operate in 200 VM chunks. So you can really do as many as you want, but it would kind of like execute one recovery plan at a time, and that maximum is 200. So if you had like 1,000 VMs, you would do the first 200 and then the next, so on and so forth.
Okay. And are recovery plans, do you typically create those like based on specific application types or tiers or multi-tier applications that go together? How does that work?
There's no right or wrong way, but I guess the best way is to tie it to business need or rules. I guess the most important though is like the base infrastructure. So you'll like in Xileap, you can run live VMs, so you'll probably want to stand up at least one Active Directory domain controller and maybe other, some primary services that you want to ensure that are there on time of failover. And then, you probably want, as an example, your SQL, booted before your app tier, so on and so forth. So you can create priorities that way. You can have up to 20 different stages in a recovery plan.
Okay, nice. Nice. Yeah, that's critical. What about, I know you mentioned licensing and pricing earlier. There's another question here about licensing and pricing again, but does the price change based on when you are simply replicating to the service versus when you actually have a disaster?
So depending, like there's different, 3 different tiers, I guess, in the per VM pricing, which the top tier does include some runnable hours for failover testing. And those hours can kind of carry over to like a good cell phone plan. So that's maybe the only difference on that side. Yeah, I don't, Ed, if you want to chime in, I kind of lost my thought.
Yeah, that's cool. So basically, from a pricing perspective, we have 2 options. I think Dwayne mentioned it earlier. We have what we would call an umbrella option where for like, in a standard setup, it's not exactly 2.0 or 2.5%, but roughly for a standard type deployment would be about 2.5% of the overall cost of the service. And the other option is on a per VM basis, as Dwayne described earlier. Was there any other nuance we were looking for beyond that, though?
Oh, I just clued into what I wanted to iterate is that as far as, if like the capacity changes, like say Nutanix needed to add 5 additional like nodes to your cloud cluster to, do the service, there's actually no extra charge for that. So it does stick to the per VM pricing. So it is kind of good from that perspective as well. And that's behind the scenes. Like you don't have to manage adding, physical hardware or taking it away. That's our responsibility. Or the cloud gremlins that live in the Xileap cloud, they do the work.
Right. And no matter what, I mean, all of those options have got to be far less than having to build your own identical cluster in some data center across the country, which is what traditionally companies had to do.
Yeah, and it's usually, like I mentioned in the prezo, it's, upwards of 40-50% TCO savings. So what's that?
I was just going to say, I've been fairly guilty of, like, even as a operations manager, like you get all the costing in front of you, but like the power bill never hit my budget. So I never really cared about it when I was in that position. So I guess it all depends from like, what's hitting your books too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like the per VM pricing because I know a lot of companies, like when I was an IT manager, there was just a handful of, the most critical applications that had to be back up and running if we had a disaster within, 24 hours or whatever it was back then. And then there was a whole long list of other VMs and applications that just really weren't that critical. So being able to have that flexibility to just select the most critical VMs is highly beneficial, in my opinion. Another question here about the Xileap solution is there a free trial?
Yep. You could go to the website, and there's actually a link there on the landing page that says, do you want to do a free trial now? You just fill out the form, and someone will contact you and set you up.
Very nice. And so can you kind of walk us through this? Once we are set up with the free trial, how long does it take to get up and running? What's the process there?
The longest process usually mostly revolves around setting up the VPN. There is like a menu system that can drive the VPN configuration for your on-prem device. So if you're using a Palo Alto as an example, or one of the supported devices, it can spit that out for you. But there's also an option to use our own networking service, which would deploy a VM on-prem to create that connection. I would say most times that's the most time-consuming part of the whole setup. And then other than that, it's, applying the policies and replicating, so that can happen pretty quickly.
Okay, very nice. Far easier than having equipment again at another site and testing some sort of replication solution. This sounds very easy to get up and running. I want to call everyone's attention to the handouts tab. It's there that you'll find the handout on the Xileap service. There's a PDF, a solutions brief there. There's also a link to Nutanix.com. And once you go to Nutanix.com, just go to products, and then you'll find Leap Disaster Recovery in there, and then click on Test Drive Leap to try it for yourself. Very easy to get up and running. One-click DR failover and failback. That's important. So it's been really great having you on. Thank you so much, Ed and Dwayne. Great presentation. We've got a lot of good feedback on the demo as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Appreciate it.
Yeah, same here.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you to everyone in the audience for supporting today's event. Before we go, some of you may have heard we have a Tango gift card to give away. This is a $300 Tango gift card. And if you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. This gift card is going to, drum roll, please, Julie London from Maine. Congratulations, Julie London from Maine. We'll reach out to deliver that gift card. If there's any questions we didn't have time to get to, we'll do our best to get to those. Thank you, everyone, for the excellent questions that came in. Congratulations to Julie. She's there in the chat doing a woohoo. So very cool. And thank you to everyone who joined us on the event. Again, thank you to Nutanix for supporting today's webcast. For more information on Xileap, visit Nutanix.com. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.